Hey Slate Teens, Pastor Dustin here. Hope everybody is doing well. Miss you guys. Hope you guys are surviving quarantine. Today we're going to talk about faith some more. Be back in Hebrews chapter 11 as we've been walking through that chapter. But before we do that, we're going to play a little bit of a game. Alright, I'm going to put a picture up and give you choice A or choice B, and you get to decide which choice you would prefer. Okay, so here's your first picture. Would you choose A, the cabin by the lake, or B, being able to sit on the beach? Maybe this is what's your dream vacation? Would you prefer to, be out by a lake, maybe fishing or swimming or just hiking or whatever? Or would you rather be vacation at the beach, sitting on the beach, reading a book, playing in the water, building a sandcastle maybe, swimming from sharks, whatever? Which would you choose, A or B? All right, next question. All right, number 2. Would you prefer the ice cream sundae or the awesomely decorated cake? All right, which would you prefer? Which would you pick? All right, if you're watching this with your siblings, now is your time to argue it out. All right, get your arguing out of the way for the day for your parents and argue about this here right now. Take a few moments. Which would you prefer, the ice cream sundae with the cherry on the top or the decorated cake with cupcakes on it? Which would you choose if you had a choice? All right, third, it's gonna get harder now. Here we go. Which would you prefer, the peas or the carrots? Now you have to choose one. You might want to look around and make sure your mom and dad aren't watching to see which vegetable you end up picking, but you got to pick one. Would you pick A, the bowl of peas with the funny leaves in it, whatever that is, or B, the carrots with whatever they have on them? You got to take the whole plate, the whole bowl, and eat it. Which one would you choose? All right, one more. Last one. Would you choose A or B? A represents prosperity, you're in charge, popularity, you're rich, a good social status, you're successful. B would be kind of the down and out, unpopular, outcast, penniless, unsuccessful, social outcast type. Which one of those would you pick? Now, given the choice, this one seems kind of obvious. But why would somebody pick the unobvious choice, do you think? Who would do that? Can you think of someone who would pick the odd choice? Why would they do that? Well, today, as we talk about faith in Hebrews chapter 11, we're going to address just that on this episode of QuaranTeens. Today we're going to be talking about the faith of Moses. If you remember, last time we talked about several of the patriarchs, 3 of them. We talked about Isaac, we talked about Jacob, and we talked about Joseph, and about their faith. And as we saw in the passage about Joseph's faith, verse 22, Joseph mentioned that the Israelites would exit Egypt. He talked about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. What did he mean by that? Well, if we follow along in the story of the Old Testament, if you remember, Jacob's family, after that famine where Joseph was in Egypt and his brothers came down and got food from him, and Joseph revealed himself to be their brother, and they had the big family get together and brought their father Jacob down. The whole family moved down to Egypt. And so Joseph on his deathbed made them the children of Israel promised to take his bones with them when they left Egypt. Well, the children of Israel lived in Egypt for years, and the Bible, in the beginning of the book of Exodus, it tells us that a new Pharaoh came along that didn't know who Joseph was. All he saw was there was this big group of Israelite people, this nation that was growing too big for Egypt. And he was worried that they might expand and they might overthrow the Egyptians. So he put them into slavery. and had them building his cities and doing his slave work. Another thing that the Pharaoh did was he decided that since they would continue to grow, that they would have every male Hebrew child killed. The order went out that all the male children were to be thrown into the river and drowned. Okay, and so this is where we find the story of Moses. So Moses' father and mother, after Moses was born, she tried to hide Moses for some time, but if you know anything about babies, they're kind of loud and they're hard to hide. So the time came when she couldn't hide him at home any longer, so she put him in a basket, took him down to the river. And there his sister watched over him while he was hiding in the river. And one day along came the daughter of Pharaoh along the river, and she finds this basket and she finds this baby, and Moses' sister comes to her and says, "Hey, I can go find somebody to take care of this baby for you." And so Moses' sister brings his mother, and so the daughter of Pharaoh kind of adopts Moses. He's under her protection, and it says that Moses actually grew up with his mom, and when he was grown, then she brought him to the daughter of Pharaoh to be adopted into Pharaoh's family officially, and to live with Pharaoh's daughter as her son. Okay, and so that's where we get to today. All that information can be found in Exodus chapters 1 and 2. And that brings us to what we're going to talk about today in the passage of Hebrews 11:24 through 26. And so I'm going to read that here as we get started. Hebrews 11:24 through 26 says this: By faith Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. As we have been talking about faith in Hebrews chapter 11, we've seen that faith is not just a feeling inside or a thought process, but it affects every area of your life, including how we act. And as we have seen through the chapter here in Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews has given us example after example of Old Testament heroes that acted in faith. And so here we come to Moses and his faith. And so how is Moses' faith going to affect how he acts? Is he going to choose choice A, right? The position, the pleasure, the prosperity of being an Egyptian adopted into Pharaoh's family? Or choice B, affliction, contempt, scorn, the outcast? Well, we see that Moses chooses B. So what did he give up? Well, the Bible says that he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So he gave up that position that he had. He also refused to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin, the things that give you momentary satisfaction. As a prince in Egypt, he could have had whatever he desired, any kind of food, any kind of luxury. He could have whatever he wanted. He also refused the prosperity or the treasure, all the treasures of Egypt. I love the movie National Treasure. And in that movie, of course, they're hunting for a hidden treasure that some people believe is not real, that it's not there, that it's all just a story. But the main characters believe this, and so they go through the entire movie. They're hunting for this treasure. And in the end, they open this big room with all this treasure from all these different places around the world that had been collected in this one spot. And they, as they light up that room, you can see the vast amounts of treasure. Well, that's what Moses would have had access to. Egypt was one of the wealthiest nations in the world, and he refused all that treasure. But what did he choose? Well, our verses tell us that he chose to be mistreated with the people of God. He chose to suffer the reproach of Christ, and he chose to look for the greater reward. Why? Why would he do this? Well, the Bible tells us it was because of his faith. Now, there's nothing wrong with prosperity. There's nothing wrong with position. There's nothing wrong with pleasure. within themselves. And there's nothing inherently good with suffering and nothing inherently good with affliction. But what does matter is when the real choice is choosing between pleasing ourselves and pleasing God. And that's where Moses found himself. Moses made his choice because those things were in the way of his purpose for living. God had a plan for Moses. He had something planned out for Moses to do, and those things that he gave up in Egypt were not a part of it. So Moses gave up option A, that prosperity, the pleasure, all the wealth of Egypt, everything that he had as being a son of Pharaoh, and chose option B, being an outcast, experiencing affliction, suffering with the people of God, because ultimately, in his faith in God, he knew that this was not God's plan for his life. A was more about pleasing himself rather than pleasing God. All right, so let's land this plane. Okay, so what does this mean? What does this have to do with teenagers in 2020, in quarantine, schooling at home, stuck with mom, dad, and siblings? How does this apply? Well, no doubt you have a lot of free time right now, a lot of extra time right now, and there's a lot of things to do with that extra time. We got your video games, you got books to read, you got sports, you got TV shows to watch, you got social media to be on, and a host of other activities available to all of us. So how does that apply when it comes to these things in our life? Now, none of these things are bad in and of themselves, but when they take the place of or keep us from following after God in our lives in faith, our faith should cause us to reject them, as Moses did. So, are there certain video games that the content of those games just aren't good for your walk with God, that aren't helpful to your growth, that hinder, that pull you in a wrong direction, the direction of pleasing self rather than God? The same with how much time we spend playing video games, other than following after God and using that time to love others, to encourage others, to be around others, to fellowship with others. The same can be said with books. What books are we reading? How much time do we spend reading those books? Sports activities, sports events, TV shows, social media. For some of you in public schools, acting in faith might be that you end up receiving some criticism, some affliction on social media because you are a Christian. This also may apply when it comes to something you think you might want to post because, well, that would be funny, a little demeaning to somebody else, or that would be crude or rude, but I'll get a lot of likes. A lot of people will respond. Again, choosing pleasing self and pleasing God. So, what about you? Moses made a choice. His faith caused him to give up those pleasures that were there available to him because he knew that was more seeking self than seeking after God. What activities, events, or possessions in your life are hindering your faith, keeping you from following after God? And what are you going to do about it? Thanks for joining me again on this episode of QuaranTeens. We'll see you guys next time.